Hey Sea fans, it's Raina, and today we have a very special treat for you. We're going to interview an amazing professional underwater model, but before we get into that, I'd like to ask that you please like and subscribe. Click the bell if you want to get notifications in your email inbox, and definitely check us out on patreon.com/RainaMermaid if you'd like exclusive content and merchandise. So today I am speaking with Kristy Jessica. She is an amazing freelance model, and I've met her because she does stunning underwater stuff, and I'm going to get her to tell you a little bit about herself.
Hi.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here with you.
Thanks, I'm excited to be here too. We're down here in Tulum, Mexico, doing some underwater modeling here in the cenotes.
Yes, and that means you're going to hear birds because we are in Mexico. So we're on a workshop right now. Can you tell us a little bit about the workshop?
Yes, so we're working together with Brett Stanley. Brett Stanley and I have come together and joined forces to create an underwater modeling workshop to teach models and mermaids alike to learn some more posing techniques for underwater, and then also some technical techniques as far as moving together with fabric and posing towards the lighting and nice angles of the body and things of that nature, and then posing in a pool versus posing underwater like in nature, things to look out for, and safety and all that good stuff. So safety is always number one.
Yes, we say that in all of our videos. I think sometimes people don't realize that it really is number one, especially when you're doing things professionally. So before we get into the underwater stuff, could you tell us a little bit about your experiences modeling, how long you've been doing it, the type of work you like to do?
Thank you, yes, I would love to. I started modeling as a hobby when I was 18 years old, and that was 14 years ago. I started on MySpace because I had selfies back before they were called selfies.
I remember that.
Yeah, back on MySpace, and I posted them, and some photographer was like, "Hey, I like your photos. Would you like to do a real photo shoot with a real photographer?" And I was like, "Oh, well, I'm really short and I have stretch marks, so I don't think that that would be something that I could do." And he was like, "Well, we'll see if you make the cut." Oh, right. Yeah, so I worked with him, and that photographer turned out to be like the creepiest, like worst experience ever. But I still, for some reason, wanted a model. And so I continued to find photographers on MySpace and Craigslist and through word of mouth. And I eventually started a Model Mayhem page. I kind of did a little bit of figuring out by myself for a long time. And I printed out a 80-page portfolio. And I had a printed portfolio that I would take to go-sees that were really just scams that I found on Craigslist, but I thought that I was doing what America's Next Top Model was teaching me to do, right?
I feel like America's Next Top Model gives a really skewed perspective of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of legit information and stuff in there, and I definitely am glad that I had that experience watching the show and kind of modeling myself after it, but I thought that I was going to be gearing myself towards commercial work. I told myself I'm going to be a petite fashion runway model. And I did all these go-sees, and I got scammed by an agency, you know, spent a bunch of money on a fake portfolio that was really crummy, and they didn't get me any work. And eventually I got into the Bon Marché in Seattle before it was called Macy's. It was John Robert Powers has regular castings there. I went up to the 7th floor of the Bon, and I did the acting and modeling runway casting tryout, and there's a ton of people there. They were like, "What are your goals?" And I said, "Well, I want to be a petite runway fashion model." And they were like, "Okay, I don't know if anybody's told you this before, but we're gonna tell it like it is." And I was so grateful that they told me this. They said, in mainstream corporations across America, there are approximately 30 legitimate jobs for commercial petite runway fashion modeling. I don't know if that's currently still the average number, but back 13 years ago or so, that's about what it was for mainstream petite runway fashion legit magazine models. There are like probably at least 1 million girls trying to get your position because of the height requirement for standard agency modeling. So we can totally submit you, but just so you know, this niche is probably a pipe dream. And I was, oh, and I had that printed portfolio I was telling you about. And all the photos that were in it were like bikini and body paint and conceptual art and stuff, and nothing was fashion. And I finally put 2 and 2 together, and I was like, you know what? I just want to be a creative model and work with people who are creative. And the kind of people who are doing that are mostly independent photographers who are doing their own thing, who are looking for independent models. And I was like, oh my God, there's an independent world. I don't have to be signed by an agency. I can just find gigs from people who are freelancers themselves.
Mutual interests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so later on, way later on, after I got fired from my restaurant job and all this stuff, 7 years or so into actual freelance modeling, I finally joined a Facebook group for other traveling freelance models. And that's when stuff really started to pick up, because we could build as a community, get safety references about, hey, is this photographer okay to work with? Hey, I'm traveling to XYZ city. Does anybody know like a good place for me to stay? Models will stay with each other. Some photographers will host models, and there's this whole community of freelance traveling models.
So networking really helped you in
Oh
that.
yeah. Oh yeah, you gotta network. Like when other models are asking me for advice and they're like, why do you want me to make friends with other models? Shouldn't I be making friends with photographers? Yeah, but you need to be a part of the community because we really do support each other in this. It's not like this huge competition like they show you on America's Next Top Model. We're all here to help each other out.
Yeah, and I want my fans to focus on something specific that Kristy just touched on, is that this wasn't instant. It took a lot of hard work, it took a lot of rejection and failure and hard stuff before you actually found your niche. And I feel like a lot of the people viewing this, maybe especially because of the rise of social media, they tend to have this pressure that, okay, I have to make this happen right now, it's gonna happen right now, and maybe lose out a bit on the growing and learning experience that comes from failing or having a crappy photographer doing the crappy portfolio and stuff. Because I have a very similar experience to you, as we're very similar in age, and around the same time I was getting into modeling. I was a lot more petite than this. This was before all the chronic illness stuff. And it was the same kind of thing. It was just a lot of duds before I started to kind of hit my stride and then discovered underwater modeling. So how did you discover underwater modeling?
How did I discover underwater modeling? Okay, so my first underwater shoot was actually very strange. It was in Florida, and it was with this guy who was shooting photos and videos. And he invited me to do a video shoot, which was a scenario involving me dying in a swimming pool.
Sounds very complex for a first shoot.
It was, yeah, I know. So like it took, we took 30 takes of me being down there for 5 seconds and then acting out the facial expression that he needed and whatnot. Ironically, it was actually really fun.
That's good.
Yeah, sure. It was a really strange experience, but I enjoyed the challenge of it. And I started seeing other more artistic underwater photos. There's a photographer in Hawaii that I've worked with a bunch of times. He goes by Art of Women.
Oh yeah, I've seen that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. I started modeling for him first when I was 19. We did all above water stuff. And then when I was 24, I flew out to Hawaii again to work with him. Let's try some underwater. So I worked with him. I really, really liked the underwater stuff in the ocean. You could see coral in the background. And I started becoming more and more obsessed and addicted to the feeling of being underwater, the feeling of connectedness. For me, mainly the challenge of getting a variety of different types of imagery, because there's so much stuff that you can do above water with regular gravity on land.
Yes.
But underwater is a completely different scenario. You get just more ethereal, impactful images. The lighting is totally different.
Completely.
It's an inspiring place for me to be, and to challenge my body and my mind to be like serene enough and focused enough to get down there and do that. It's just all around an exercise of creating an art, and it's a little bit of yoga and meditation at the same time when you're down there.
And you do yoga and meditation to help you with this work.
Yes, I do.
She's very flexible. We're going to share some of her pictures on her social media, and you have to check it out. It's really, I look at it, okay, I didn't know a leg could move that way. When you think back to those first few experiences, and especially when you're talking about being in the ocean, was that intimidating for you at all? Or were you scared, safety-wise? What was that like?
Oh yeah. The first few times that I posed underwater in the ocean with Art of Women, fortunately he's a very experienced swimmer, and there was a few times where a wave caught me. He had to physically grab me and keep me up above water. And so working with somebody who is an experienced swimmer and knows how to do the lifeguard safety duties and stuff just in case, all of that is super important. You have to be working with somebody who's aware. I was a pretty good swimmer when I first started out underwater modeling. I would say I would pass a swim test at a pool for sure, but I wasn't a certified freediver until about a year and a half ago.
Which is something I actually reiterate to my fans a lot. People who are looking into getting to mermaiding, looking into doing any kind of underwater work, I'm always saying how incredibly helpful, even if all they can do is the level 1 where they're in the pool, if they're not going to be out in the ocean, even that is incredibly helpful. So I'd love to hear your take on your freediving course experience and how that worked towards helping you model better.
When I went to Tahiti to do underwater modeling for another photographer who goes by Christian Columb, his photography name is Smart Shot. He has all these cool locations out there, and the first time I was there, like maybe 2 years ago, he has this location that's a crashed airplane underwater.
Oh, that's so cool.
And at the same time that I was there, he had another model working with us and we were taking turns posing for him. And the other model was a professional competitive freediver.
Wow,
and
competitive.
I wasn't a freediver at all. And her name's Julia Wheeler. She's amazing. Anyway, so she was swimming down there next to that airplane, posing with it, no problem. And I was, hell yeah, I'm gonna go pose next to that airplane. Started swimming down there and my ears started to pop and I started to feel disoriented and I was like, I can't even get close. And so I felt this is a challenge that I need to overcome. The following spring, I went ahead, all right, I'm gonna go back to Tahiti and pose on that airplane after I figure out how to freedive. So I did a freediver certification course in Seattle, and that was really challenging, super challenging.
I found it was really challenging as well.
Yeah, it ain't for the faint of heart. And in fact, because of me not being careful enough, I actually had a minor ear barotrauma, and I think I have permanent tinnitus forever. As a result, I've had tinnitus, the ringing in the ear, for over a year and a half now since that training course. So if you get your ear squeezed, go back up.
Yeah.
Just go back up, it's not worth it.
No, my fans will remember that back in 2015 when I did the HalCon parade and everything, I had experienced the same thing and I ruptured both my eardrums. And if you remember, I had the cotton packed in my ears and had my wig covering it and I couldn't hear anything when I did that gig. And it took a year for my ears to hear. And I've always had ear problems, unfortunately, so the ringing has been there forever. But you don't want to mess around with this stuff, your ears. And when you take a freediving course, they teach you how to recognize those signs in your body and how to equalize properly and when to equalize. Just recognize signs of distress in your own body that you maybe shouldn't push. It teaches you when you can push and when you shouldn't push.
Yeah.
And that's really important, yeah. So you did the freediving and now you're working with all these amazing photographers. Are there any specific shoots that sort of stand out in your mind as being really creative or really memorable? Can you describe any of them for us?
The first time that I was in Tahiti, I had the opportunity to pose along with a stingray in nature. And I was really scared, but the photographer had been out there many times and the stingrays that were in that area were super acclimated to humans being in the water. And I posed with the stingray and I was totally freaked out. I've got footage, behind the scenes footage of me freaking the F out. After that shoot, I was, none of those photos came out. I was just totally spazzed out. What a waste. But then we looked at the photos later and the photos came out great. There's tons of photos that looked just like ethereal and it looked like I had a connection with the animal. And I think that having imagery that's soft and artistic and beautiful that shows the connection between humans and nature, it helps portray a message that certain animals or certain types of locations aren't scary or demonic. Every time I mention that I posed with a stingray to most people, oh my God, Steve Irwin died.
And that's really rare, actually. I looked it up and he was one of one death in 50 years or something like that. It was incredibly rare.
And I've also heard that he was kind of cornering the stingray and the stingray felt like it needed to protect itself.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy. And obviously, swimming with any kind of wildlife, you need to know what the local laws are. We talked about this when we did our manatee video. And you have to be respectful of nature. They're not a prop, they're an actual living creature, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, modeling with a stingray is kind of amazing, and I love that you talked about how you thought your photos were going to be awful, because I know we've all had that experience, and then when you see it, you actually find something you like. I find with underwater modeling, you could take 1,000 pictures and end up with 3.
And those 3 are the ones that made it all worth it.
Totally, totally. Here on this course we've been taking, Kristy's been teaching us a lot of really cool techniques. One thing that I did not have experience with before was modeling without air in my lungs. I was always modeling with air, or at least partial air, and compensating for that buoyancy with weights. So I was wondering if you could talk to my fans a little bit about the breathing up technique that you use and modeling without the air in your lungs and just feeling comfortable.
It all starts when you wake up in the morning. If you start off your day on the right foot without fear and anxiety, then the rest of your day is going to become very easy. And this is kind of all that yoga and meditation in your life that kind of transcends throughout everything else that you do. Every day I wake up and I read some positive material for 10 minutes. I meditate. I do some breathing exercises. I write down 3 things that I'm thankful for. And I'm not saying that everybody has to do this in order to pose underwater. This is just part of my life and just part of my being and part of how I function as a happy adult. It's also kind of techniques that I had to teach myself to do because I'm a recovering alcoholic. So it's kind of all sort of the metamorphosis of my life, and this addiction to modeling is kind of a replacement of my addiction to alcohol. So anyway, the yoga, meditation, breathing exercises at the beginning of the day will help you have less anxiety once you get into the water. When you are preparing to get into the water and when you're first entering the water, it's good to be mindful of your breath, because without even thinking about it, it's easy to have short, shallow breaths. If you're feeling nervous, you're psychologically telling yourself, oh, this is gonna suck, it's gonna be scary. Just connect yourself with breathing. Slow inhalations and slow exhalations. And you know, not super slow, just slow enough to where you're being mindful of like the, and that'll slow your heart rate down. It'll make it easier for you to be underwater for longer and to keep those micro expressions of fear or anxiety off your face, because that'll kind of mess your photo up too when you're down there. And so, yeah, having slow breathing while you're standing in the water waiting for the photos to be taken. Right before you go down underwater, you want to take a few good breaths. The techniques that we've been teaching in the class with Brett on this trip, what we've been doing is 3 sharp, deep inhalations. So right before you go under. What we're doing with Brett, as Brett's the photographer, he wants to be aware of when he should go down, is we take 1 deep inhalation and 1 full exhalation. Another deep inhalation, and then nod at the photographer to give him the signal so that he can go underwater before the model and he can be prepared and in position for taking the photos. And then after the 3rd inhalation and exhalation, then you can go underwater. Now, if I want to be posing by the surface, I wouldn't be exhaling all my air out first. I would only exhale a little bit, just so that I have some air in my lungs so that I could remain by the surface. But if my plan is to go further down into the water and be more fully submerged or at the bottom of the pool or just deeper in the ocean or whatever, then I would exhale all my air out to make it possible for me to sink more. And everybody's buoyancy is going to be a little bit different. Some people sink like a rock naturally, and some people can exhale all their air out and it seems like they're still floating at the surface. Yeah. So you just kind of got to learn your body, and sometimes people have to hide weights around their body even with the full exhalation. But a lot of people don't realize that they're holding on to air even after they feel like they've exhaled all their air.
That was me, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, even after I exhale all my air out, I do sink pretty naturally, but I also end up being able to exhale more air out once I get down there, because the water kind of compresses you and the air in your lungs kind of condenses a little bit, and you can actually exhale even more out usually once you get down there.
Yeah, and Brett was explaining that the sort of science behind those quick, sharp breaths helps oxygenate your blood so that you have more oxygen flowing through your body to help you last longer without air when you're down there.
Yeah.
So I found that really fascinating, and freediving goes over that sort of stuff as well, and that's why it's so helpful to have that. When Christy and I are talking about this, the photographer is also watching us the entire time. So I had an experience yesterday where I'm still kind of learning how I'm sinking without any breath in my lungs. I'm not used to that. And a few times I would overshoot it and go down really fast and not realize how deep I was. And then when it was time to come up, I'd start to panic because I'm thinking, why am I not hitting the surface yet? And we came up with hand signals, just like you do with scuba diving. So I just went like this to Brett, and he just pushed me right back up so that I could get up faster. And I probably wasn't more than 12 feet deep. It's just, it was deeper than I thought I was. So
you were in a dress.
And I was in a dress, yes. So actually, yeah, let's talk a little bit about the difficulties in modeling with fabric. A lot of my fans are mermaids, so they do the tails, but they also do really enjoy having the wavy fabrics underwater or trying dresses. And Kristy taught us specifically how to do this the day before, and she showed us some examples underwater that we watched. But there were a few really key points that we talked about with safety and then just trying to make the fabric move and air in the fabric. So,
well, definitely before you go underwater, if you have fabric with you, just kind of squeeze any air bubbles out of it so that when you go down, those air bubbles don't keep your fabric from floating up. Just be in really good communication with the photographer. The photographer is also going to be hopefully keeping an eye on the fabric to making sure that it's not getting stuck on stuff, especially if it's a dress. If the edge of the fabric is stuck on a rock, that could be a potential hazard. What I like to do for posing when I'm going to go underwater is I think about the orientation that I want to be in my pose, how I want the fabric to be around me. If I want lots of fabric on this side and on this side, then I'll kind of orient it as so. But I also need to keep in mind how deep under the water I want to go. If I want to be kind of right by the surface, then I'll position the fabric in a way that it's going to be right by the surface. But if I want to be 3 or 5 or 10 feet underwater, I'm going to be bringing the fabric down there with me, and it's going to pull. If I'm going to go down and I want the fabric to be full, I would be holding on to the bottom edge of the fabric so that it all fans out. There's kind of some physics involved in the fabric. If there's no current, usually once you get your fabric to the shape that you want it to be in, you can let go of it and pose in front of it or around it. A lot of great images that I like to do, I want there to be like a movement in the fabric or it looking like a movement, so I'll kind of hold on to a corner and do a slow spin and then let go and then have a soft pose to my hands so the fabric kind of accentuates whatever dancerly type pose that I'm doing. Holding onto the fabric though and pinching it kind of looks a little bit contrived in my opinion. A lot of people like having the holding onto the fabric and making it look like wings kind of a thing. So
I loved your comparison you gave yesterday. If you hold it like this, it's like you're holding a stinky rag.
Yeah. There's got to be a way to pose your hands that looks elegant. So some people call this glamour hands, where you have 2 fingers up and 2 fingers down when you're holding onto something, and all your fingers are slightly curved at all the joints. That always looks good. Always having the knife edge of your hand facing the camera as opposed to like the palm of your hand or the back of your hand, because if this side or this side is facing the camera, then I call them spider hands. It just looks like a big like spider in your face. Your eye is going to be drawn to that. Like,
and especially because when underwater photography is usually done with a wide angle lens, so anything that's close to the camera is going to be big and distracting away from the model.
It's really hard to kind of get used to that, especially when you're posing underwater, because it's natural to be trying to go like this. But if the photographer's right here and you're posing like this and your hand is out by the camera, then that hand is going to be the hugest thing in the frame. So you want to be more like this at a 90-degree angle to the camera if you don't want to distort your body parts.
Yeah. It was really amazing seeing her do this underwater. She took this black fabric and it was just a piece of straight fabric, and the way she draped it around herself and held her body, she actually looked like she was wearing a dress even though it was just a piece of black fabric. Yesterday when I was modeling in the dress, that was one of the issues that I did have, was it got tangled around my legs, so I couldn't really kick to get back up, and that was part of the reason why Brett had to come get me, because I was just covered in fabric. It was not great. Personally, I wouldn't suggest jumping right in with fabric if you haven't done any underwater stuff yet. I would get used to how you feel underwater, your buoyancy, and definitely always do this with trained people who have experience. Where I come from, not a lot of people do underwater photography, so we're sort of working with people who are learning in the same regard that we are, which is great because people need to learn, but you also need to be aware that if you're working with someone who's brand new to it, they may not have the safety insights or experience.
Yeah.
So just tread carefully. Because I am a mermaid channel, I know that you have tried a mermaid tail before. So
I have.
I wanted to know your experience with that.
Most of the mermaid stuff that I've done has been in the Bahamas with my friend Raven Lynette. And she's an amazing artist. She's a dancer. She teaches dance classes for students. She's a mermaid. She makes her own mermaid tails. And so she had sewn 2 fabric mermaid tails that had a monofin for the inside of the fin part. And she made matching ones for us. And we posed together in the Bahamas for photographer Elena Callis.
Oh, I love Elena's work. I've been following her for 15 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, she's really nice. She's easy to work with.
That's like a bucket list of mine. I'd love to work with her sometime.
Contact her.
Yeah, let's go to the Bahamas. Let's do that as our next one.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, she's great. Yeah, we got to do some poses together and individually, and I was nervous about swimming in a monofin at first, so I practiced with the monofin, and once I got the motion down, it was easy.
Yeah.
I loved it.
I actually really like it because I almost don't have to worry about the lower half of my body. A monofin kind of forces you. You're not treading water. It forces you to do what you need to do in order to swim. And that's sort of the one caveat where you can have something closer to the camera. Brett was saying that when the mermaid tail is closer to the camera, it makes it look bigger and more fantasy-like, so that's pretty cool. One thing I wanted to touch on as well that we talked a bit about yesterday was hair, dealing with hair underwater.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so your hair can make or break the shot. If you have long hair, it's really important once you get down into the water and you find your pose. One thing that we've been talking about is when you get underwater, you kind of have one main pose in mind, and you can do a little bit of variation within that pose, but a lot of people get down underwater and they try to do a bunch of different poses so that they can get more poses for their time. But usually if you're trying to do a bunch of stuff underwater, you're moving really fast, your hair is going to be doing weird stuff. And if you're moving fast, your hair might look like really stuck to your head, and you might have a really weird tiny egg shape to your head because of the way that your hair is. Or it could be totally straight up if you went down in the water.
I get this one a lot.
Yeah, making a mustache. So it's good to be down in the water, you find your pose, you hover there, and then in order to get your hair to kind of have some body and look nice, if your hair's in your face or whatever, you just kind of move forward, back down, and then up, and then your hair will kind of, so you have to sort of get into the motion of moving your head softly underwater to kind of get your face out from underneath any strands that are in front of your face. And the length of your hair is going to make a big difference too. If your hair is like this length, then you're probably going to have different types of motions, as opposed to if your hair's all the way down your back, then it's probably going to be a little bit more of a challenge with wider movements. So you kind of have to get used to exactly what kind of motions you need to make with your head, but just to be aware that once you get down there, it's okay to use a hand to get your hair out of your face a little bit if it's totally in your face. But once you're down there, you want to take advantage of all the shots that you're going to get. So if you have to move your hair with your hand, do it in an elegant way, not the, spider hands. You want the knife edge of your hand to move your hair out of the way. Once you get down there, just being calm and not frantically flicking it or moving your head really fast, because that'll mess up the shot.
Yeah, I like that you pointed out actually trying to move it with purpose, because I fall into that trap of wasting my shot and my breath by being under there trying to fluff the hair, fluff the dress. But if you do it with purpose, that can actually be a shot, or fluffing out the dress can be a shot. And I sort of figured that out by the 3rd time I went under yesterday after wasting a few shots. This is why we do these kind of courses. You learn these things, right? So finally, I'm gonna kind of put you on the spot with this one just a little bit. I'm wondering if you have any words of wisdom for people looking to get into the modeling industry. Maybe some little gems that you wish someone had told you back then.
Oh goodness, this is a great one. For me, one of the things that I wish that I knew when I started modeling was that I needed to come up with a good model alias before I started doing a bunch of photo shoots, because I kind of started when I was 18, before social media was a huge thing, and now it's like a really big deal to have your brand kind of set in place, because if people are taking your picture and posting them on Facebook, they're probably going to tag your personal page if you don't already have a model alias. So your branding is going to be super important. which is kind of tough for a lot of people to think about because when you start modeling, you're really insecure. You're not sure, am I gonna do this like seriously or not? But I highly recommend to have the best modeling opportunities and the best modeling experience in general to come up with a realistic sounding first and last name. Merryweathers or whatever, something that sounds like it could potentially be a real person's name. So when I started modeling, people were just posting my photos as Christy or as my legal name, which my real name is Christine. I'm not gonna say my last name just because.
That's fine. You don't have to.
I don't use my last name on Facebook either.
My fans know all about that because Raina is my middle name, so they know all about that. Yeah.
Christine is my legal first name, but everybody calls me Christy and always has my whole life. So when I first started modeling, after about a year, I was part of a promo team and they nicknamed me Rebel. Rebel kind of stuck with me for a while and photographers were calling me Rebel on Facebook, but I didn't have a Facebook page called Rebel until I was about 22. So people were still tagging my personal page. And then when I signed up for Model Mayhem, Rebel by itself was already taken, so I needed to come up with an adjective to go with Rebel so that like I can have my Model Mayhem profile. So I came up with Pure Rebel. That became my modeling alias, but then later on, people were all right, but what's your real name? Because Pure Rebel is like obviously not what your parents named you when you were born. So that's part of why I think that marketing and branding, starting off with your name is super important. If there's a lot of model friends that I have who have realistic sounding model aliases and I never even question what their real name is and they never have that big of a problem with it. Next to that, I would definitely say learning how to check references because the first photographer that I worked with was total negative experience.
And I just want to really send home that point because a lot of brand new mermaids specifically are so excited for the opportunity to get photos or to be in the media or something that they don't adequately background check things and they end up in dangerous situations or exploitive situations.
Yeah, there's a lot of people out there who are targeting people who are just turning 18 so that they can get them to do something that they wouldn't have done if they had already had a few shoots under their belt. And unfortunately, it's really hard to have other freelance experienced models find those people because they don't even know that they're supposed to be looking for advice from other models in the first place. It's kind of an unknown unknown. So that's why on my social media from time to time, I'll just post, hey, if anybody's looking to get into modeling, I offer free advice. Just contact me and I'll tell you some stuff that I think is really gonna be helpful for you and kind of point you in the right direction for what your goals are based on what my experiences are. And safety, as always, #1.
Yeah, tell somebody where you're going if you're going on a shoot. Tell a friend, tell a family member, make sure somebody knows where you are. And when Christy was talking here about using names, we do have 2 videos about using names and branding, and especially for people who perform as mermaids as well, it's very similar to models. It can help you brand, but it can also help you separate from your real life because a lot of models and mermaids have day jobs as well. And I used to teach, so that is the big reason why I used Raina as my name, and it helped me separate those 2 worlds. Now I don't teach, so it doesn't matter. It's kind of taken over my life, but that really helps, so this has been really great. I'm wondering, what else do you have coming up in the future that you're gonna be working on? Any interesting projects, new trips?
Oh, yeah. So, over the course of the summer, I have made a life transition and I now live in a van.
Ooh.
That's a whole thing. And so my traveling lifestyle is kind of, I still have some model tours that are planned, but I think that I'm kind of balancing between, am I gonna live more on the road now because I'm gonna be on less airplanes and more in my van to travel and to have a place to stay and stuff. I have a trip coming up where I'm gonna be driving to Texas. I also have another trip where I'm gonna be flying to La Paz and working with Art of Women.
Oh, great.
Doing underwater freediving modeling. And then in December, I'm gonna drive down through California and go to Joshua Tree and the Salton Sea and through San Francisco.
Wow.
And in January, there is a van life gathering meetup in Arizona that I think I'm gonna partake in. And there's a lot of photographers that will hire me in the Phoenix area, so I'll probably do a whole Arizona trip. And then beyond that, I know that there's a few of my favorite collaborators that we like working together. We're gonna go to Colombia and get some amazing imagery out in nature out there. And I have other bucket list places that I wanna go to, but I haven't totally
flesh them out.
Yeah, I haven't ironed it all out yet. I've got the rest of the year planned out mostly, and then January and February are kind of tentative plans.
That's exciting though. I love that you are doing the van thing. We have a few mermaid friends who do that as well.
Cool.
And it seems to open up a lot of possibilities. It's really cool. But it's also kind of brave of you to do that. Did you find it kind of scary to make that jump, or was it?
Oh yeah, it was probably one of the scariest decisions I ever made. When I was doing it, I was like, okay, this is either going to be the best decision of my life, or I'm going to die by getting stabbed by a crackhead in my sleep.
Yeah. So Kristy Jessica, everybody, you can check her out on Instagram as Pure Rebel Model, and you also have a Patreon as well?
I do, patreon.com/Pure Rebel.
And do you have any other social medias you'd like our fans to check out?
Yeah, I mean, I do have a normal portfolio website. It's just KristyJessica.com. And I do have a YouTube channel under Kristy Jessica as well.
There's a really great little mini documentary she has on there that you should check out. It's all about her experience getting into freelance modeling. It's really cute, and you can see her being all bendy with her yoga and stuff too.
Yeah,
it's really cute.
The documentary I made is called Bring Something Sexy.
Ooh, bring something sexy. I love it. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me and my sea fans, as I call them. And best wishes, everybody.